Welcome to chapter 3, children. Grandfather wasn't content with planting trees in our garden. During the rains, we would walk into the jungle beyond the riverbed, armed with cuttings and saplings, and these we would plant in the forest beside the tall sal and sesame trees. But no one ever comes here, I protested, the first time we did this. Who's going to see them? We are not planting for people only, said grandfather. We are planting for the forest and for the birds and animals who live here and who need more food and shelter. He told me how men, and not only birds and animals, needed trees for keeping the desert away, for attracting rain, for preventing the banks of rivers from being washed away, and for wild plants and grasses to grow beneath. And for timber? I asked, pointing to the sal and sesame trees. Yes, and for timber. But men are cutting down the trees without replacing them. For every tree that's felled, we must plant two. Otherwise, one day there will be no forests at all, and the world will become one great desert. The thought of a world without trees became a sort of nightmare for me. It's one reason why I shall never want to live on treeless moon, and I helped grandfather in his tree planting with even great enthusiasm. He taught me a poem by George Morris, and we would recite it together. Woodman, spare that tree, touch not a single bough. In youth it sheltered me, and I'll protect it now. One day the trees will move again, said grandfather. They have been standing still for thousands of years, but one day they'll move again. There was a time when trees could walk about like people. But along came the devil and cast a spell over them, rooting them to one place. But they are always trying to move. See how they reach out with their arms, and some of them, like the banyan tree, with its traveling roots, manage to get quite far. In the autumn, grandfather took me to the hills. The deodars, Indian cedars, oaks, chestnuts, and maples were very different from the trees I had grown up with in Dehra. The broad leaves of the horse chestnut had turned yellow, and smooth brown chestnuts lay scattered on the roads. Grandfather and I filled our pockets with them, then climbed the slope of a bare hill and started planting the chestnuts in the ground. I don't know if they ever came up because I never went there again. Goats and cattle grazed freely on the hill, and if the trees did come up in the spring, they may well have been eaten. But I like to think that somewhere in the foothills of the Himalayas there is a grove of chestnut trees, and that birds and flying foxes and cicadas have made their homes in them. So I'll show you some pictures from this chapter. Very beautiful illustrations. See? This is grandfather, this is Ruskin, young Ruskin. They're going and they're planting the saplings. Grandfather, held by Ruskin. Alright. This is that forest, that island, mangoes. And see, the cattle grazing. All right. Yeah. So let's come to chapter 4 now. Back in Dera, we found an island, a small rocky island in the middle of a dry riverbed. It was one of those riverbeds so common in the Doon Valley, which are completely dry in summer but flooded during the monsoon rains. A small mango tree was growing in the middle of the island, and grandfather said, "If a mango can grow here, so can other trees." As soon as the rain set in, and while the river could be crossed, we set out with a number of tamarind, laburnum, and coral tree saplings and cuttings, and spent the day planting them on the island. When the monsoon set in, the trees appeared to be flourishing. The monsoon season was the time for rambling about. At every turn there was something new to see. Out of earth and rock and leafless bough, The magic touch of the monsoon rains had brought life and greenness. You could almost see the broad leaved vines grow. The creepers, plants sprang up in the most unlikely places. A people would take root in the ceiling, a mango would sprout on the windowsill. We did not like to remove them, but they had to go if the house was to be kept from falling down. If you want to live in a tree, it's all right by me, said grandmother, but I like having a roof over my head, and I'm not going to have it brought down by the jungle. The common monsoon sights along the Indian roads were very picturesque. The wide plains with great herds of smoke-colored, delicate-limbed cattle being driven slowly home for the night, accompanied by several ungainly buffaloes and flocks of goats and black long-tailed sheep. Then you come to a pond where some buffaloes were enjoying themselves, with no part of them visible but the tips of their noses, while on their backs were a number of merry children, perfectly and happily naked. The banyan tree really came to life during the monsoon, when the branches were thick with scarlet figs. Humans couldn't eat the berries, but the many birds that gathered in the tree, gossipy rosy pastors, quarrelsome mynas, cheerful bulbuls and coppersmiths, and sometimes a noisy bullying crow feasted on them. And when night fell and the birds were resting, the dark flying foxes flapped heavily about the tree, chewing and munching loudly as they clambered over the branches. The tree crickets were a band of willing artists who started their singing at almost any time of the day, but preferably in the evenings. Delicate, pale green creatures with transparent wings, they were hard to find among the lush monsoon foliage, but once found, a tap on a bush or leaf on which one of them sat would put an immediate end to its performance. At the height of the monsoon, the banyan tree was like an orchestra with the musicians constantly tuning up. Birds, insects, and squirrels welcomed the end of the hot weather and the cool quenching relief of the monsoon. A toy flute in my hands, I would try adding my shrill piping to theirs, but they must have thought poorly of my piping, for whenever I played, the birds and the insects kept a pained and puzzled silence. So I'll show you some pictures from the monsoon. See, such nice flowers. Look at this. The buffaloes going home. Yeah. The tree. So the last chapter, children. I wonder if they missed me when I went away. For when the war came, followed by the independence of India, I was sent to a boarding school in the hills. Grandfather's house was put up for sale. During the holidays, I went to live with my parents in Delhi, and it was from them I learnt that my grandparents had gone to England. When I finished school, I too went to England with my parents and was away from India for several years. But recently I was in Dera again, and after first visiting the old house, where I found that the banyan tree had grown over the wall and along part of the pavement, almost as though it had tried to follow grandfather, I walked out of town towards the riverbed. It was February, and I looked across the dry watercourse. My eye was caught by the spectacular red plumes of the coral blossom. In contrast to the dry riverbed, the island was a small green paradise. When I walked across to the trees, I noticed that a number of squirrels had come to live in them, and a quail, a sort of crow pheasant, challenged me with a mellow, "Who are you? Who are you?" But the trees seemed to know me. They whispered amongst themselves and beckoned me nearer. And looking around, I noticed that other small trees and wild plants and grasses had sprung up under the protection of the trees we had placed there. The trees had multiplied. They were walking. In one small corner of the world, grandfather's dream was coming true, and the trees were moving again. That's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed. Just see the pictures. The coral blossom. Alright. So, about this book, a very famous newspaper in London wrote, "He whisks you away to the lofty hills, amongst the gentle breezes, waterfalls, and laughter, and creates a whole new world, one of serenity and beauty." The Guardian. An amazing poetic author, and I hope all of you will plant some trees, some plants in your house and take care of them. Thank you very much.